Maria Torres pushed through the heavy kitchen doors, balancing 3 plates of lobster thermidor on her left arm. The smell of garlic butter mixed with expensive perfume hit her as she entered the dining room. It was Friday night at Romano's Fine Dining, and the place was packed with the kind of people who wore watches worth more than her yearly rent. She'd been doing this for 3 years now. 3 years of smile, nod, serve, repeat. 3 years of being looked through rather than looked at. At 42, Maria was used to being invisible. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her sensible shoes squeaked slightly on the polished marble floor as she moved between tables. The younger servers called her Mama Maria behind her back, though not always kindly. They wondered why she never moved up, never tried for a better position, never seemed to want more than what she had. What they didn't know was that Maria had learned long ago that wanting things only led to disappointment. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the restaurant was hosting some big charity gala for the arts. Maria didn't know much about it, just that the guests had paid $500 a plate, and there was supposed to be some famous pianist performing later. The whole place had been transformed with white roses and gold ribbons. Even the regular lighting had been swapped out for something softer, more romantic. She approached table 7, where a group of women in sparkling dresses were laughing loudly over champagne. "Your entrees, ladies," Maria said quietly, setting down each plate with practiced care. One of the women, a blonde with diamonds at her throat, didn't even glance up. She just waved her hand dismissively. "More champagne, and this fork has a spot on it." Maria looked at the fork. It was spotless. "Of course, ma'am. Right away." As she turned to leave, she heard one of them whisper, "God, can you imagine doing that job at her age? I'd simply die." The others giggled. Maria's face stayed neutral. She'd heard worse. Much worse. She'd been called slow, stupid, and once, memorably, that dumpy woman who can't get an order right. She'd learned to let it slide off her like water off a raincoat. Getting upset didn't pay the bills or help her daughter with college tuition. The evening rolled on. Maria's feet ached in that familiar way they always did by hour 6 of her shift. She refilled water glasses, cleared plates, smiled at jokes she didn't find funny, and apologized for things that weren't her fault. A man snapped his fingers at her from across the room. A woman sent back her steak twice, though it looked perfect both times. Someone's kid spilled red wine on her apron, and the parents didn't even apologize. Around 8 o'clock, the energy in the room started to shift. Guests kept checking their phones and glancing toward the small stage at the far end of the dining room. That's where the grand piano sat, all black and glossy under a spotlight. It was a beautiful instrument, the kind Maria used to dream about playing when she was younger. Now, she just dusted around it during her morning shifts. She was clearing table 12 when she heard the event coordinator, a thin, nervous man named Gerald, talking urgently into his phone near the kitchen. "What do you mean he's not coming? This is a disaster. These people paid good money. They expect a performance." Maria pretended not to listen as she stacked dirty plates, but her ears perked up. The pianist had canceled. She felt an odd flutter in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe? Or perhaps just indigestion from the hurried staff meal she'd grabbed earlier. Gerald hung up and immediately made another call, then another. His voice got higher and more panicked with each conversation. "Nobody's available? It's Friday night, I understand, but this is an emergency." The guests were starting to notice something was wrong. The buzz of conversation grew louder, more agitated. Maria saw Mr. Romano, the restaurant owner, emerge from his office looking concerned. He was a good man, Mr. Romano. Fair. He'd given her extra shifts when her daughter needed emergency dental work. He'd never made her feel small. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald finally announced, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke into the microphone on stage. "I'm afraid our pianist has taken ill and won't be able to perform this evening. We're working on finding a replacement, but please, enjoy your dinner and—" The groans and complaints drowned out the rest of his words. Someone at table 3 loudly demanded a refund. The blonde woman from earlier declared the whole evening ruined. Maria watched it all unfold while she stood in the corner holding a tray of empty glasses. Gerald rushed past her, phone pressed to his ear, practically in tears. A high school piano teacher? Fine, yes, anyone. What do you mean they need an hour to get here? The grand piano sat empty on stage, waiting. The spotlight seemed to make it glow. Maria remembered the first time she'd sat at a piano. She'd been 7 years old, small hands barely stretching an octave. Her teacher, Mrs. Chin, had told her she had a gift, a real gift. By 16, Maria had won state competitions. By 17, she'd had a full scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music. By 18, her father had died, her mother had gotten sick, and the scholarship didn't matter anymore because someone had to take care of the family. Someone had to work. Dreams were luxuries, and Maria's family couldn't afford luxuries. That was 24 years ago now. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. She watched Gerald make call after call, watched the guests get more restless and rude. She saw Mr. Romano trying to calm people down, offering free dessert, free drinks, whatever it took. And she saw that piano, beautiful and silent, going to waste. Her hands started to tingle. She hadn't played in front of anyone in years. She practiced sometimes, late at night, at the old church 2 blocks from her apartment. Father Miguel left the door unlocked for her. She'd play in the dark, empty sanctuary, just her and the music and the memories of who she used to be. But that was different. That was private. This would be in front of hundreds of people who'd already decided she was nothing. People who'd laughed at her, ignored her, treated her like furniture. Maria took a deep breath. Her daughter Rosa's voice echoed in her head from their conversation that morning. Mom, when are you going to stop hiding? You're amazing. You should let people see that. Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria walked up to Gerald. He was frantically scrolling through his contacts, sweat beading on his forehead. Excuse me, she said quietly. Sir, I can play the piano. Gerald looked up at her like she'd just spoken in ancient Greek. His eyes scanned her uniform, her worn shoes with the scuffed toes, the coffee stain on her collar she hadn't been able to get out. Then he laughed. Not a kind laugh. A dismissive, almost cruel laugh. Right, and I can do brain surgery. Get back to work, please. I've got a real crisis here. Maria felt her cheeks burn. She should have kept quiet. She should have known better. She was turning to leave when she heard Mr. Romano's voice. Gerald, let her play. Gerald spun around so fast he nearly dropped his phone. Mr. Romano, with all due respect, this isn't the time for jokes. I have a room full of very important donors who are about to walk out. Mr. Romano stood there, his arms crossed, looking at Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was a stocky man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen a lot over the years. I'm not joking, Gerald. I said let her play. But she's a waitress. Gerald's voice went up another octave. A few nearby guests turned to look at the commotion. And you're a coordinator who currently has no one to coordinate, Mr. Romano said calmly. What do you have to lose? 5 minutes. Give her 5 minutes. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Part of her wanted to take it back, to say never mind, to disappear into the kitchen and forget this moment of insanity. Her hands were already shaking. What if she messed up? What if she froze? It had been so long since she'd played for anyone but herself and God in that empty church. Gerald looked between them, his face red and splotchy. Fine, fine. But when this backfires, don't say I didn't warn you. He threw his hands up and stormed toward the stage. Mr. Romano touched Maria's elbow gently. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But I heard you once, you know. About 6 months ago, I came in early one morning to do inventory, and I heard piano music coming from the dining room. You were here before your shift, playing that piano when you thought no one was around. Maria felt her eyes widen. She'd thought she was always alone during those rare moments when she came in early and couldn't resist touching the keys for just a few minutes. You're good, Maria. Really good. These people need to hear something beautiful tonight. I think you can give them that. He smiled at her, and for the first time in years, Maria felt like someone actually saw her. Not the uniform. Not the waitress. Her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Mr. Romano gave her shoulder a quick squeeze and then walked toward the bar to watch. Gerald was already on stage, tapping the microphone with way too much force. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a temporary solution. One of our staff members has volunteered to play for you while we continue, searching for a professional pianist." The way he said, "staff member," made it sound like he was announcing a trained monkey would be performing tricks. The room buzzed with confused murmurs. Maria started walking toward the stage. Each step felt like she was moving through honey. The dining room suddenly seemed enormous, the distance to the piano impossibly far. She could feel every single eye turning toward her. The conversations didn't stop. "If anything, they got louder. Is he serious right now? Oh, this should be entertaining. What's next? The busboy doing magic tricks?" Someone laughed. Then someone else. It started as scattered chuckles and grew into something meaner. Maria's face burned. She kept her eyes down, watching her scuffed shoes move across the polished floor, one foot in front of the other. Just keep moving. She passed table 7, where the blonde woman with the diamonds sat. "Oh my God, it's our waitress," the woman said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I'm definitely calling the event company to complain." Her friends giggled. One of them actually pulled out her phone like she was getting ready to record what she expected to be a disaster. Table 15 had an older couple. The man shook his head sadly. "Poor woman. Someone should stop her before she embarrasses herself." Near the back, a group of younger guests in designer suits were taking bets. $20 says she doesn't even know how to play. This is probably some kind of publicity stunt. Maria's throat felt tight. Her vision started to blur a little around the edges. What was she doing? These people had already decided who she was. Nothing she did would change their minds. She should turn around. She should run back to the kitchen where she belonged, but then she saw Rosa. Her daughter had come in through the kitchen entrance and was standing in the doorway with some of the other staff. Rosa was 19, beautiful and bright, working her way through community college while living at home to save money. She was everything good in Maria's life. And right now, Rosa was looking at her mother with an expression of pure pride and encouragement. Their eyes met across the room. Rosa put her hand over her heart and nodded. "You can do this," her eyes said. "I believe in you." Maria reached the stage. The 3 steps up felt like climbing a mountain. The spotlight hit her face, hot and blinding. She couldn't see the audience anymore, just shapes and shadows beyond the light. Maybe that was better. The grand piano waited. Up close, it was even more beautiful. The wood gleamed. She could see her reflection in the polished surface, distorted and small. Her fingers reached out and touched the closed lid, and it was cool and smooth. Gerald stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking like he wanted to disappear. The room had gone from laughter to a kind of cruel anticipation. They weren't expecting music. They were expecting a spectacle, a failure they could talk about later over more champagne. Maria sat down on the bench. It was the expensive kind with a cushioned top that adjusted to the right height. She'd sat on plenty of piano benches in her life, broken ones in school practice rooms, wobbly ones in church basements, but never one like this. She adjusted it carefully, aware that every movement she made was being watched and judged. Her hands hovered over the keys. They were trembling. She pressed them together, trying to steady herself. The whispers continued. She could hear snippets even over the rushing sound in her ears. "How long do we have to sit through this? Where's my phone? I need to record this. I'm going to need another drink." Maria closed her eyes. She thought about the morning her father died when she was 18, and her whole life changed in an instant. She thought about all the rejection letters from schools and jobs over the years. She thought about the nights she'd cried from exhaustion, from feeling like she'd never be more than what she was. She thought about Rosa, her miracle, who somehow believed her mother was capable of great things despite all evidence to the contrary. And she thought about Mrs. Chen, her first piano teacher, who'd told her something important a lifetime ago. Music isn't about being perfect, Maria. It's about being honest. When you play, you're telling your truth. And your truth is beautiful. Her hands found the keys. They knew where to go, even after all these years. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. The room waited. Some people were still laughing. Some were checking their watches. Some had already turned back to their conversations, dismissing her before she'd even begun. Maria took one deep breath. Then another. She thought about every person who'd ever made her feel invisible. Every dismissive wave, every snapped finger. Every time someone looked through her instead of at her. And then she began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question. Soft, gentle, almost fragile. Then came the second note. And the third. The laughter stopped. The melody that came from Maria's fingers was nothing like what anyone in that room expected. It started quiet, almost like a whisper. A single note held just long enough to make people wonder if they'd imagined it. Then another note joined it, and another, building slowly like the first drops of rain before a storm. The conversations didn't stop immediately. At table 9, a man was still mid-sentence about his new yacht. At table 3, someone was complaining about the temperature. But one by one, the voices began to fade. Something in the air had changed. Maria's eyes stayed closed. She didn't want to see their faces. She didn't want to know who was still laughing or who had already dismissed her. Right now, in this moment, it was just her and the piano and the music that had lived inside her for 24 years, waiting to come out. Her fingers moved across the keys with a confidence she didn't feel in any other part of her life. This was the one place where she'd never doubted herself. The one place where she'd always known exactly who she was. The piece she was playing wasn't famous. It wasn't Chopin or Beethoven or any of the classical composers the guests might recognize. It was hers. She'd written it years ago, in the weeks after her mother's funeral. Back when she was working 2 jobs and raising a baby alone, back when the weight of everything felt like it might crush her completely. She'd never played it for anyone. It was too personal, too raw. It was every tear she'd swallowed while serving people who treated her like she was nothing. It was every dream she'd folded up and put away. It was the sound of survival. The melody shifted, growing stronger. Her left hand built a foundation of deep, rich chords, while her right hand danced above it, telling a story without words. The music spoke of loss and loneliness, but also of quiet strength, of getting up every morning even when you didn't want to, of loving your child so much you'd sacrifice everything, even the parts of yourself you thought you couldn't live without. The dining room had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their clattering. Through the service window, cooks and dishwashers stood frozen, dish towels in hand, listening. At table 7, the blonde woman with the diamonds had her hand pressed to her mouth. The phone she'd pulled out to record Maria's humiliation sat forgotten on the table. Tears were running down her perfectly made-up face, leaving dark trails of mascara. The older man at table 15, who'd said someone should stop Maria before she embarrassed herself, was leaning forward in his chair, his dinner completely forgotten. His wife was clutching his hand and she was crying too. Even Gerald, the coordinator who'd laughed at her, stood frozen at the edge of the stage. His arms had uncrossed. His expression had shifted from annoyance to something like shock, but Maria didn't see any of this. She was somewhere else now. She was 18 again, sitting in the audition room at the New England Conservatory. She could still remember the way her hands had shaken that day, how the panel of judges had smiled at her when she finished playing. "We'll see you in September," they'd said. And Maria had floated home, so full of joy she thought she might burst. She'd told her parents at dinner that night. Her father had lifted her off the ground in a hug, spinning her around the tiny kitchen. "My brilliant girl," he'd said. "I always knew you were destined for great things." 3 weeks later, he'd had the heart attack. Sudden, no warning. 1 minute he was laughing at something on television, the next, he was gone. Just like that, her whole world had shattered. Maria's fingers pressed harder into the keys, the music growing more intense. She could feel the emotion building in her chest, threatening to overflow. This was the part she'd written in the hospital waiting room, in those terrible hours between when they told her mother about the cancer and when they explained it was already stage 4. Someone in the audience made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Maria transitioned into a classical piece now, one she'd learned when she was 15, Rachmaninoff, Prelude in G minor. It was technically difficult, full of crashing. chords and racing passages that required your hands to fly across the keyboard. She'd won a state competition playing this piece. Her fingers remembered every note, every nuance, every moment where you had to pull back or push forward. It was like riding a bike. Your body didn't forget, even when your mind tried to convince you that you'd lost it all. The music filled every corner of the restaurant. It bounced off the high ceilings and wrapped around the expensive chandeliers. It found its way into hearts that had forgotten what it felt like to be truly moved by something. At the bar, Mr. Romano had his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. He'd known. Somehow he'd known she had this inside her. Maria's daughter Rosa was openly weeping now, her hand still pressed over her heart. She was watching her mother with an expression of pure wonder, seeing her not as mom who worked too hard and worried too much, but as the artist she'd always been underneath. The younger guests who'd been taking bets sat with their mouths open. One of them had his phone out, but he wasn't recording to mock. He was recording because he wanted to remember this. He wanted proof that he'd witnessed something extraordinary. Maria moved from Rachmaninoff into something more contemporary. A piece by Ludovico Einaudi that she'd taught herself last year, staying up late after her shifts, watching YouTube videos on the old laptop Rosa had given her. The melody was haunting and simple, but it required perfect control. Every note had to be exactly right, the timing precise. She'd practiced this piece over and over in that empty church. Father Miguel had found her there one night around midnight, and instead of asking her to leave, he'd sat in the back pew and listened until she finished. "You play like someone who has something important to say," he'd told her. "Don't keep it to yourself." The music swelled and softened, rose and fell, like breathing, like heartbeats, like life itself. Maria thought about all the times she'd walked, past this piano at work, running her fingers across it when no one was looking. All the times she'd heard guests compliment the music during other events and wondered what it would feel like to be the one playing. To be the one people came to hear instead of the one they called over to refill their water. She'd convinced herself it didn't matter, that those dreams belonged to a different Maria, a younger one who didn't know yet how hard life could be. She'd told herself she was content with what she had. A job, an apartment, a daughter she loved more than anything. But that had been a lie. A necessary one, maybe, but still a lie. Because this, right here, this was who she really was. Not the uniform or the tired feet or the polite smile she wore like armor. This was Maria Torres, pianist. Maria Torres, musician. Maria Torres, artist. The piece was building to its climax now. Her hands were moving faster, the notes coming in rapid succession. She could feel sweat on her forehead, feel her muscles straining, but she didn't care. She was giving everything she had, holding nothing back. The final section came, the part she always thought of as the resolution, where all the pain and struggle transformed into something else. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance, peace, understanding. Her fingers found the last few chords. She let each one ring out fully before moving to the next. The sound filled the space, gorgeous and complete. And then came the final note, a single, pure tone that hung in the air like a star. Maria held it, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting it fade naturally, slowly, gently, until there was nothing left but silence. She kept her eyes closed. She wasn't ready to come back yet, wasn't ready to face whatever came next. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3, then the room exploded. The sound of applause hit Maria like a physical force. It started somewhere, in the back of the room, and rolled forward like a wave, growing louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was people standing up. Not just one or two. Everyone. The entire dining room was on its feet. Maria's hands were still resting on the keys, trembling now for a different reason. She looked out at the sea of faces, and they were all looking back at her, really looking, seeing her, maybe for the first time all night. For the first time in 3 years. The blonde woman from table 7 was clapping so hard her diamond bracelets were jangling. Her face was a mess of running makeup, and she didn't seem to care. She was shouting something that Maria couldn't hear over the roar of applause, but her mouth was forming the word beautiful over and over. At table 15, the older couple who'd pitied her were holding hands and clapping. The wife was wiping her eyes with her napkin. The husband was shaking his head slowly, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just witnessed. The young guests in designer suits weren't taking bets anymore. They were standing and cheering, their expensive watches glinting under the chandeliers. As they brought their hands together again and again, even Gerald, who'd laughed at her and called her off for a joke, was clapping. His face was red, but not from anger this time, from something else. Shame, maybe, or wonder. Mr. Romano was beaming, his applause steady and strong. He caught Maria's eye and nodded once as if to say, "I told you so." But it was Rosa that made Maria's tears finally spill over. Her daughter had pushed through the crowd and was standing right at the edge of the stage, her face glowing with pride. She was crying and laughing at the same time, clapping so enthusiastically that other people around her were starting to smile just watching her. Maria stood up from the bench on shaky legs. She didn't know what to do. She'd never had a moment like this before. In all her years of playing, even at competitions when she was younger, she'd never experienced anything close to this kind of response. She did what felt natural. She bowed. Simple and small, just a slight dip of her head. But the gesture made the applause grow even louder somehow. A man started making his way through the crowd toward the stage. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit with a purple pocket square. Maria didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way he moved that suggested he was used to being important, used to people making way for him. He reached the stage and gestured to ask if he could come up. Maria nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, taking the microphone that Gerald had abandoned. "My name is Vincent Chen. I'm a music producer here in the city. I work with the symphony orchestra and several recording labels." He turned to Maria. "What's your name?" "Maria," she managed to say. Her voice came out scratchy and small. "Maria Torres." Well, Maria Torres, that was one of the most moving performances I've heard in my 30 years in this business. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "I'd very much like to talk with you. About recording, about performances, about sharing your gift with more people than just this room." The crowd erupted again. Maria took the card with numb fingers, staring at it like it might disappear if she blinked. Over the next hour, Maria couldn't take 2 steps without someone stopping her. The blonde woman from table 7 found her near the kitchen and grabbed both her hands. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "I was so rude to you, so dismissive. I thought, God, I don't know what I thought. But that was ignorant and cruel. And I'm genuinely sorry." Maria didn't know what to say. She'd spent 3 years serving this woman and people like her, and none of them had ever apologized for anything. "You have a gift," the woman continued. "A real gift. Thank you for sharing it with us, even though we didn't deserve it." Others came too, the older couple, the young professionals, even people Maria had never directly served. They wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how the music had made them feel. One woman told her it reminded her of her late sister. A man said it was the first time he'd cried since his divorce. Rosa stayed by her mother's side through it all, squeezing her hand whenever the attention got too overwhelming. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she kept whispering. So proud. The evening wound down eventually. Guests began to leave, but many stopped by the piano to drop business cards or write their numbers on napkins. A woman who ran an art gallery wanted Maria to play at her next opening. Someone else asked about booking her for a wedding. A professor from the university music department mentioned teaching opportunities. When the last guest had finally left, Maria found herself sitting at the bar with Mr. Romano. He poured her a glass of water and slid it across to her. "You could have told me," he said gently. "All this time you could have said something." Maria took a sip of water. Her hands were still shaking slightly. Would it have mattered? I was still just the waitress who needed a job. That part of my life was over. Was it, though? Mr. Romano gestured at the pile of business cards on the bar. "Seems like maybe it's just beginning." Maria looked at Vincent Chen's card on top of the pile. A music producer. A real one, not just someone being polite. He'd listened to her play and heard something worth pursuing. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "This is all I've known for so long. Work, take care of Rosa, pay the bills. I don't know how to want more than that anymore." "Well, you've got some time to figure it out." Mr. Romano smiled. "But Maria, if you do decide to chase this, you have my blessing. And my recommendation, anyone who asks, I'll tell them the truth. That you're one of the hardest workers I've ever had, and that you've got more talent in your little finger than most people have in their whole body." Maria felt fresh tears coming. "Thank you for believing in me tonight, for making Gerald give me a chance." "I didn't make you play beautifully," he pointed out. "That was all you." Over the next few weeks, Maria's life changed in ways she'd never imagined. Someone at the gala had recorded the performance on their phone and posted it online. The video went viral, not just locally, but nationally. News outlets picked up the story. Waitress stuns charity gala with hidden talent. The performance that stopped a room cold. From serving tables to standing ovations. Maria's phone, which usually only rang with shift schedules and doctor's appointments, wouldn't stop buzzing. Interview requests, performance offers, people wanting her story. Vincent Chen called 3 days after the gala. He wanted to produce an album. He had a studio ready and musicians willing to work with her. "I haven't been this excited about a project in years," he told her. But Maria didn't quit her job right away. She kept showing up for her shifts at Romano's, even as the offers piled up. The other servers treated her differently now. Some were genuinely happy for her. Others seemed resentful, like she'd been hiding something from them on purpose. The kitchen staff asked her to sign their aprons. Guests requested her section specifically, wanting to be served by the piano lady. Rosa kept pushing her to take the leap. "Mom, this is your chance. This is what you've dreamed about your whole life." "I dreamed about you too," Maria reminded her. "And that dream came true. I don't need anything else." "But you can have both," Rosa insisted. "You can be my mom and be a musician. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." Finally, after a month of thinking and planning and occasionally panicking, Maria made her decision. She would record the album. She would take the performance offers. But she would do it on her terms. She met with Mr. Romano in his office. "I want to keep working here," she told him. "Not full-time, but maybe 1 or 2 shifts a week. And once a month, I'd like to play piano for the guests. Not for free," she added quickly. "But maybe we could start a scholarship fund. Money from special piano nights could go to young musicians who need help. Kids like I was. Kids who have talent but no opportunities." Mr. Romano's eyes got a little misty. "I think that's a wonderful idea." "And I want the scholarship named after someone," Maria continued. "Mrs. Chen. She was my first piano teacher. She saw something in me when I was just a little girl with big dreams. I want her name to help other kids with big dreams." The album came out 6 months later. Maria called it The Waitress, not because she was ashamed of what she'd been, but because she wanted to honor it. Every song on the album was dedicated to someone from her life. The people who'd supported her. The struggles that had shaped her. The daughter who'd never stopped believing. The title track was the piece she'd played that night at the gala, the one she'd written during the darkest time in her life. She'd refined it a bit in the studio, but the heart of it remained the same. Raw, honest, real. The album sold better than anyone expected. Not millions of copies or anything, but enough. Enough to pay off Rosa's college tuition. Enough to move into a bigger apartment. Enough to buy her own piano instead of borrowing time on someone else's. Maria started performing at small venues around the city. Concert halls, theaters, even back at Romano's on those special monthly nights. She never forgot the feeling of being invisible, and she made sure she saw everyone in her audiences. After performances, she'd stay and talk to people. Really talk! Not just polite thank yous, but actual conversations. She used her platform to talk about people whose talents go unnoticed because of their circumstances. She spoke at community centers and schools, encouraging kids who didn't think they had a chance. "You never know who's listening," she'd tell them. "You never know who will believe in you if you just give them the chance to see who you really are." A year after that night at the charity gala, Maria was invited back to Romano's for another event. The scholarship fund she'd started had raised enough money to help 12 young musicians. 12 kids who now had a chance at their dreams. She played that night, of course. The same Steinway grand piano, the same spotlight, the same stage, but everything else was different. She wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. She was Maria Torres' pianist. Maria Torres, who'd reminded a room full of people that everyone has a story worth hearing. And this time, when she sat down at the piano, there was no laughter, only anticipation, respect, and the absolute certainty that something beautiful was about to happen.